Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Silent Hill podcast. I promised I was going to make a video that caps off the Silent Hill 1 video game and my viewing of it. And basically, it was going to be like a final thoughts type video about the game itself and finally give a chance to talk about my opinion and my thoughts on it. And so I wanted to go ahead and say everything that I really loved about the game itself, point out some of the interesting stuff both from the monsters, from the characters, and talk about the characters themselves, and then also just briefly highlight some of the bad things within the game, because while it was a very great game, it wasn't perfect altogether. You can see that even in its infancy, there had some great potential happening with it. It just didn't have like 100% perfection, and I'll talk about some of the things that stood out. First, let's talk about the characters themselves and how intriguing they were. Obviously, the main character was Harry Mason, and he was a pretty good character in the game. I think they made him kind of bland on purpose because they wanted to make sure that you yourself as a player was integrated within the character itself. In other words, if the developers made Harry very, very specific, then it would alienate a lot of the audience. But instead, by making him bland, then any of the playing audience could in turn easily, I guess, not be distracted by anything else very specific with Harry, and in turn become the player itself. So I think that's why they kind of made him pretty bland. I can also see why he was changed, ironically, to a woman within the first Silent Hill movie, because anything involving his actions, his dedication, his devotion, and the horror he was witnessing between all of the crazy stuff there in Silent Hill, it definitely played on film with much better with having, let's say, a woman, because anything involving like the maternal love between a mother and her daughter, and then of course a woman experiencing all the ridiculously horrible stuff occurring within the real world and then finally the Silent Hill world, it would have made just better sense, and so I can see why they went with that angle. But still, very good character, good outcome for him. So it was nice to see that there was a full resolution of his character there. Speaking about Dahlia, which could be considered, I guess, the second most common character within the game, if the developers wanted to make her just seem as crazy as possible, then job well done. There were some points, in fact, where it seemed like I still kind of second guessed what she was doing. Like I alluded to it in one of my other videos, where why was she bringing this god or whatever it was to the world if it was so bent on destruction, on basic wrath, everything that would ultimately end in everyone's demise, including ironically her own. So maybe it just her craziness. She couldn't see exactly the forest through the trees and what would happen if she brought this thing forth. But as far as her being a character and basically the evil and human antagonist within the entire game, they did a pretty good job. I can see why she was selected to return within so many of the other versions of other Silent Hill games. So otherwise, and of course with the film itself, so she served a very good purpose there. Alessa, considered probably the next major character within the game. Again, also very tragic. I can see that the developers couldn't do much in terms of showcasing Alessa's, I guess, suffering or how she came to be, especially with the immolation, because with this being a child and showing this in a video game, it would have definitely, brought red flags everywhere. It would have brought the wrath of all the video game boards and the ratings boards. So I can see where things kind of were curtailed with Alessa's character. They just showed the after effects, obviously with her showcasing like in flashbacks what had happened very, very briefly, so along those lines, and then also showing her character as an adult now confined to that wheelchair, kind of like a burn victim of some sort. But otherwise, still pretty tragic character, and of course with her having such a major role in all the other video games, it was very nice to see her origin here, like where all of this entire franchise essentially started with her altogether. So they did a good job. They did a good job on her, but again, I could see why the developers had to kind of limit themselves, both for ratings purposes and then also with everything else happening in the game. Sybil, now she was definitely the standout role whenever she first appeared within the game itself. Very famous scene with her walking up towards Harry in that bar, folding her arms. Definitely, she instantly had like a you couldn't take her eyes off her. It was one of those things where it's the kind of character where you wish you could see more of because of who she was and what she was representing. She was like the most basic real person in the game, all of a sudden trapped in this world, and then with her actions trying to save both herself and Harry, and then in some cases Harry's daughter. I mean, it made you feel for her, especially when and during some of the endings, like for example when she had that parasite attached to her. Whenever that happened, it definitely got you almost sad because of what had occurred to her. But I can absolutely see why she became a prominent role within the Silent Hill game, because of her status of a cop, and then of course trying to make sure that she can protect everybody again within the film itself. And ultimately what happened to her within the film is even more tragic than it was within the game itself. Depending of course on certain versions of the game, she was saved, but in other versions she was not. But absolutely a standout role. Great work on her part when it came to the voice work, and then also the developers giving her a good character, a good life within the game itself. Kaufman, he was also very intriguing. His was a little bit more of a mystery, because I still couldn't quite grasp or understand why he was even helping Dahlia within all of this. Was it because of money? Was it because he owed her something? Because if Dahlia was doing all of this, and her excuse was that she was just plain nuts, here Kaufman he seemed like a reasonable, intelligent guy. I mean, he even seemed businesslike, like he was a major person within Silent Hill. And of course, with his Dr. Kaufman title, then that means he had a very prominent position there within Silent Hill. So, in other words, he's thinking logically. So, why he was helping all along with whatever Dahlia was doing? I mean, there was that scene where it shows the flashback of him with another doctor, and then with Dahlia, all looking over, and a ghost-like projection of sorts, looking over the body of Alessa. So how he was doing all this and why, I still don't know. It didn't really make too much sense, but his definitely had that thing where you wanted to see more of a backstory to him. And my understanding is it's explored more in one of the other games, so it'll be interesting to see that once I get around to it. Now let's talk about the game itself, all the good stuff. Obviously, the game was very influential. By far one of the most influential games within the past couple of decades. Way ahead of its time. I mean, this was at a time when it came out when the average game was either just shooting up a million bullets at unlimited targets all day long, and then getting your kicks off of that, or it was along the lines of some stupid, cheap, scary type stuff where it was building of, let's say, crescendo of music, or a huge surprise, a huge noise, something leaping out of the shadows, kind of like Resident Evil type stuff. This game was completely different. It made its lasting impression. Instead, it used the psychology of the mind and the horror of the environment to make itself influential. And it was great stuff. It was nice to see that it in turn was borrowing from some of the best elements from other very good works. Like, I could see where The Mist was definitely involved in it. I can see where, and I think this came out even before them, In the Mouth of Madness was another one as well. It had to do with the idea that anything involving the horror of the world is actually within people, and how what they do to themselves. And so anything as far as this game presenting that and doing a very good job of it, it was great stuff, especially of course when it came to the monsters within the game. I mean, obviously some of these monsters, they spawned themselves into several other versions, either directly or indirectly, in some of the other future games. But by far, they were very influential, very eerie looking. All of them had this strange human-like quality to them. I mean, it's I believe the term is called uncanny valley. It's the idea where you can take something and make it really grotesque, but as long as it doesn't look human, then it doesn't really look disturbing. But the minute you start making it more human-like, and to the point where it's almost human, but it's still just slightly off, then that's when it seems unsettling. And so I think that's what the game did a great job on. A lot of the characters, a lot of the monsters within the game had human-like proportions, human-like sizes, human-like figures. The mumblers, of course, being like tiny children. It just created that eerie, unsettling environment, especially also with the like the details, like the walls, where they would take on a rustic, blood-like look to them. Some of the walls even look like stretched out skin. It became very eerie, and that's the great part about this game. It didn't use those cheap scare tactics involving loud noises or jump type scares. No, instead it used the mind to try to do this. So absolutely influential game, way ahead of its time, and definitely this game was the reason why Silent Hill became the franchise that it deserved to be. And then let's talk about very briefly about the bad within the game. The only thing that didn't really make sense, and I was trying to see information on the Wikia pages, but I don't get this whole thing involving the drugs, like that red liquid, essentially that was there, and then the drugs that I guess Lisa was taking within the, or alluded to taking within the game, and the drugs that Kaufman will provide to the town. It seemed like why was that even in there? What did it have to do with summoning the Red God? What did that have to do with the Fog World? What did that have to do with Dahlia burning her daughter alive? I still don't see the link between anything involving that white powder or whatever that drug was, and then also that red liquid. Like, why did that even exist? You would think that something that could alter or stop this red god, or the god that Dahlia was trying to bring forth, if something like that could exist and stop, why was it even made in the first place? So again, I just don't understand that stuff. If somebody could post a comment as to what that relates to with the drugs and how that is supposed to be some kind of influence within Silent Hill, that'd be interesting to hear. What's interesting to note also is that these drugs, I don't recall them like ever being alluded to within any of the other games. So if someone has something like that, because the game took several prominent times, like you could read, I believe it was newspaper clippings where it talks about some drug being sold or distributed between the town, and then there was other clippings of officers trying to, I guess, stop the drugs from be spreading, and then some officers encountering deaths because of the drugs. I just don't know. And I was hoping if someone could have a link or something that they could post indicating what that's about. And then the other bad thing within the game itself is where's everyone else? Like, where's all the people? Obviously, it's alluded very, very heavily that a lot of the monsters within Silent Hill are the people themselves. But if that's the case, then why, was Sybil there? Why was Kaufman there as a human? Why was even Dahlia there as a human? What about the rest of the people? Like, what happened to them? If this was a giant town, which seemed like it, because traversing throughout the entire map, going from one place to another, it would take minutes at a time just to get between blocks. What happened to the rest of the people? I was hoping that the game would somehow explain and showcase what happened. The film did a much better job, obviously showcasing the town itself and the people being pulled into Alessa's wrath, and then later on all the people that the film showed living in that world thereafter. But the game did not, and so I thought if it truly wanted to show the power and the reach that Alessa had, I thought that the game should have further expounded on that. So if anyone agrees or disagrees, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on anything as far as the bad things, but it's very limited. That's the only two things that stood out within the game itself. But yes, Silent Hill 1, great game, great to see. Very looking forward to the next couple of games and see how they compare within this franchise. Hearing what people said about Silent Hill 2, which I've never played, I've seen just snippets of it, but people consider that the best one out of the entire franchise. I'm looking forward to that. So be on the lookout for new videos coming soon about Silent Hill 2. I'll do the same thing as I was doing here, where I'll just be analyzing the monsters first and then working later on some final thoughts. So very fascinating stuff. So alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.